Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a crowd. The energy buzzes like static in the air. Shoes shuffle in rhythm, arms sway, and there's an odd, cheerful unity to it all, like you've wandered into a parade without knowing what's being celebrated. People are smiling, someone hands you a flag, someone else offers you a slogan to chant, and you do it. Not because you understand, but because it feels safe. And then you notice something. No one knows where this parade is going. You try to ask. A woman beside you shrugs. We're just following the route. A man up front grins and says, it's tradition. A teenager filming a TikTok tells you this part's gonna go viral. You glance ahead and see that the road simply vanishes into fog. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep walking, but now something's shifted. The people around you still smile, still wave, but you can't unsee what you saw, that emptiness ahead. You want to stop to question it all, but your feet, like everyone else's, keep moving. That's how stupidity begins, not with chaos, not with evil, but with calm, happy repetition, and nobody asking why. The Stoics had a word for this prohairesis. It means the ability to choose consciously. Epictetus taught that everything hinges on it. You can't control the world, he said, but you can control your judgment. And yet here you are surrounded by people who gave that up for a catchy chant and matching t-shirts. Historians still argue whether the Crusades were born more of greed or ignorance. But in one of the earliest ones, a group known as the People's Crusade marched across Europe convinced they were fulfilling a divine plan. They weren't trained. They weren't organized. They believed they couldn't lose until most of them were slaughtered outside Nicaea. It wasn't evil that got them killed. It was the absence of doubt. You stop walking, just for a second, but that second feels like rebellion. A woman bumps into you and mutters, "Keep up." Someone else grabs your elbow. You'll fall behind, and you realize no one's leading this parade. It's just motion for motion's sake. A quirky tidbit: the Roman Emperor Claudius once declared all left-handed people bad luck after tripping on his toga. For a year, left-handed writing was banned in some schools. He wasn't evil, just irrational. But you try explaining that to a lefty in the 1st century. You look down at your own feet. They're still moving, almost without your consent. That's the scariest part, how stupidity becomes automatic, how it bypasses thought like water around a rock. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, but what if you stop thinking?" What if the color staining your soul comes from someone else's highlighter? You start looking around, really looking, and you notice others like you. A few heads tilted, a few brows furrowed. They're not out of step yet, but they're beginning to notice the fog, the absence of a destination. And you get this odd feeling like waking up in the middle of a conversation you didn't mean to join. That's the beginning. That split-second discomfort, that whisper of, wait, this doesn't make sense. Not rebellion, not arrogance, just awareness. You start to slow. The crowd presses behind you, impatient. But that's okay, because for the first time, your feet are following your mind, not the rhythm of the mob. And that, as the Stoics would say, is the only freedom that matters. You keep walking, but now it's different. You're not just another pair of feet in motion. You're watching, listening, feeling the strange dissonance between what people say and what they do. And then you hear him, the leader. He's not wearing armor, no dark cape, no glowing red eyes, just a neatly pressed shirt, a bright smile, and a voice that sounds like someone who's read half a leadership book and memorized all the slogans. He doesn't shout. He inspires. Says things like, trust the direction, and we're on the right side of history. And the crowd eats it up. You want to believe him too. He seems kind, well-meaning, sincere. That's the trap. The Stoics warned against charisma unaccompanied by wisdom. Epictetus said, "It is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." But when someone looks that confident, it's hard not to confuse volume with virtue. He tells a story about how he once saved a village by delivering pamphlets. The crowd claps. You wonder, did the village need saving? Did anyone ask? But the narrative feels good, clean, heroic, simple, and simplicity is addictive, so You try asking someone near you, "Where are we going again?" She looks startled. "Didn't you hear the story?" He saved a village. That's not an answer, but it feels like one. That's how stupidity works. It wraps itself in pleasant packaging. It doesn't look like danger, it looks like optimism with bad directions. A fringe tidbit: in 19th century Vienna, there was a popular doctor who insisted hand washing before surgery was unnecessary. Despite evidence to the contrary, he believed invisible forces were not real and mocked anyone who disagreed. Thousands of patients died from infections. It wasn't malice, it was ego in a lab coat. Historians still argue whether the fall of the Khmer Empire was caused by environmental failure or over-engineered water systems. Either way, it's clear someone smart kept pushing a dumb idea until no one could fix it. Back in your crowd, the leader lifts his hands again. "We are guided by truth," he announces, misquoting something vaguely Socratic. The crowd nods almost tearfully.
And birds.
You realize he believes everything he's saying. He's not manipulating anyone. He thinks he's right. He's not evil. He's wrong, but he's also persuasive. That's worse. Because if he were evil, at least you'd know to resist. But sincerity, when paired with ignorance, is the ultimate Trojan horse. You open the gates for it, you welcome it in. And then when things go wrong, you say, "But he meant well." You remember Marcus Aurelius again? A wrongdoer is often a man who has left something undone. Not always one who has done something. Sometimes the harm isn't from actions, but inactions. Not from cruelty, but incompetence. You want to shout, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," but no one around you looks ready to hear it. They're caught in the glow of a friendly face and reassuring phrases. Logic has no seat in this parade. And here's the dark twist: some part of you still wants to believe him. Because if he's wrong, then you've all been walking toward a cliff. And that thought is terrifying. So it's easier to keep smiling, to keep walking, to keep nodding at a man who speaks with conviction even when his compass is broken. But your compass just twitched. You step a little slower, eyes sharper, ears more tuned. You're starting to see through the charm, not because you're better than anyone, but because you paused. And pausing, as every Stoic knew, is the seed of all discernment. You take another step and suddenly everything feels louder. The chants, the claps, the synchronized cheerfulness. It's like a festival powered by blindfolds. You try to block it out, but the sound vibrates inside your ribs like it's trying to shake your thoughts loose. You hear someone shout, "This is what unity looks like." Another responds, "We're stronger together." And part of you agrees. Togetherness is comforting. It makes you feel safe, supported. But when you squint through the noise, you notice a strange detail. No one is steering. You look for someone, anyone actually checking the path, adjusting course, holding a map. But there's no plan, just enthusiasm, raw, unfiltered, and directionless. You think back to something Marcus Aurelius wrote: "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." A crowd isn't wisdom, it's just multiplication. Multiply ignorance and all you get is a louder mistake. Historians still argue whether the decision to invade Russia doomed Napoleon or whether it was just his refusal to accept that winter exists. He wasn't evil for trying. He was just certain. Certain that he was the exception to geography, that he would succeed where others had failed. That confidence would conquer cold. It didn't. That's the thing about evil: it often burns out on its own. It overreaches, it self-destructs. But stupidity has stamina. It doesn't know it's tired, it doesn't know it's wrong, so it just keeps going. You start to notice signs of that now. People repeating phrases that mean nothing. "We're doing this for the future. Better wrong together than alone apart." They sound noble, but when you ask what future or why not pause, they look at you like you've broken some unspoken spell. A quirky bit of trivia pops into your mind. In 1942, a British military exercise used live grenades during training, believing that real fear sharpens focus. It didn't. Half the unit was injured, the program was renamed and continued. You whisper to yourself, this is how it happens. Not with villains, with people who just never ask the next question. And here's the twist. Evil usually knows it's evil. It wears the black hat, ties people to train tracks, and smirks. But stupidity, it wears a hoodie, hands you a reusable tote bag, and says, "Trust me." It's easier to recognize malice, harder to see a well-meaning neighbor who ruins your garden because she thought coffee grounds were a good fertilizer. Harder still when she tells your whole block to do the same. And suddenly you realize something chilling: you've been that neighbor before. You remember when you gave bad advice because it felt right. When you shared an article without reading it, when you nodded in agreement just to avoid an awkward silence. You weren't evil, but you weren't thoughtful either. You were swept. The Stoics would nod here, Epictetus especially. He warned you become what you give your attention to. So if you give your attention to echoes, you become an echo. If you follow momentum, you become momentum. You pass a sign on the side of the road, keep moving. Progress is motion. You look at it long and hard, and then for the first time since this whole thing started, you stop. You don't move, not out of rebellion, not out of fear, but because you've realized something critical: if you don't choose your direction, someone else will choose it for you. And that someone might be very, very stupid. You stand still, and the world doesn't end. No lightning strikes you down. No angry official appears to fine you for non-compliance. The crowd moves around you like water around a rock, slightly annoyed, slightly confused, but ultimately indifferent. And you realize stopping is allowed. You just forgot. Someone catches your eye, tall, confident, clipboard in hand. They approach you with the swagger of certainty. "Everything okay?" they ask, flashing a smile so polished it should have its own Instagram account. "I'm just not sure where we're going," you reply honestly. "Oh, don't worry," they laugh. "None of us are. That's the beauty of collective action. The path reveals itself as we walk it." You blink. "That doesn't make any sense," you murmur. They nod solemnly. "Exactly," and walk away. You stare after them for a while, trying to process whether you just heard wisdom or nonsense. And then you realize it doesn't matter. Because they didn't know. They just sounded like they did. That's what counts now: confidence, not clarity. You sit down for a minute, your legs tired from all that following. You look at the crowd, still marching, still chanting, still filming vertical videos. The Stoics would shake their heads here, Seneca especially. "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he said. But he could have added, "and we suffer most when we confuse movement with meaning." You once joined a team project that sounded brilliant in the meeting room. Everyone nodded. Everyone smiled. The PowerPoint was clean. The problem: no one had tested the idea. 6 months later, it collapsed, and you all just kind of avoided eye contact. This, isn't it? Historians still debate whether the Maginot Line, France's impenetrable defense before World War II, was an act of brilliant engineering or blind hope. It looked impressive, but Germany just walked around it. You think of that now, how many human disasters began with "we're doing the right thing," uttered by people too scared to ask, "Is it still the right thing?" A fringe example: in the 1960s, there was a brief movement encouraging people to stare at the sun to absorb cosmic energy. It didn't end well, but the pamphlets were beautiful and the leaders really believed in it. That's the problem with good intentions: they often come without good questions. You glance up and notice some people sitting too. A small cluster, not talking much, just watching. You nod at one of them, and they nod back. No speeches, no signs, just presence. It's enough. Because right now, what the world needs most isn't louder voices, it's quieter thoughts. One woman beside you starts writing something in a notebook. You peek discreetly. She's drawing a map. Not of where you've been, of where you might want to go next. Not together, not as a movement, as a decision. Marcus Aurelius would probably call this living in accordance with reason. And that reason starts when you stop moving just because everyone else does. You close your eyes for a moment, you hear the distant drums, but they don't move you anymore. You've remembered something vital, you're allowed to think. And in a world sprinting nowhere, thought is the greatest act of rebellion. You open your eyes again and the crowd is still moving, not faster, not slower, just constant. A machine without a driver, a current without a source. You wonder how many people in it are secretly thinking the same thing you are. This doesn't feel right, but are too polite, too tired, or too uncertain to say it aloud. You remember something you once heard: the smartest people are often the quietest in dumb rooms. At the time you thought it was meant to sound noble. Now it just feels sad. Because now you're watching a group of very smart people, doctors, teachers, engineers, people with folders and titles, continue forward into fog, locked in a strange pact of silence. One person up front holds a tablet and starts narrating data. Something about progress. Something about alignment. None of it means anything, but they sound confident. You've been in this room before, haven't you? A boardroom, a town hall, a group chat where a bad idea gets floated and everyone sees it, but nobody wants to be that person. So the meeting ends and the bad idea becomes policy. The Stoics knew this flaw in human nature. Epictetus warned, when someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. But approval is addicting. So is applause. And nothing gets applause faster than saying something that sounds smart, even when it isn't. Historians still debate the reasoning behind the Challenger disaster. Some say it was engineering failure. Others say it was the silence in the room. Several engineers raised concerns about the O-rings. But the launch went ahead anyway. Why? Because the meeting was too crowded with certainty and too empty of courage. That's the real epidemic. You think the fear of looking stupid in front of stupid. You once laughed at a plan. Genuinely, involuntarily laughed because it was that ridiculous. But the room went quiet. Not because you were wrong, but because your laughter broke the spell. Afterwards, someone told you in private, I was thinking the same thing. I just didn't want to be rude. Stupidity thrives in nice people. A quirky fact crosses your mind in 1904. A group of social reformers in New York insisted that street lamps were corrupting the night sky and launched a campaign called Return to the Natural Darkness. They lobbied for dimmer city lighting to preserve the soul's alignment with the stars. Poetic right. Also, it led to a spike in crime and accidents. But hey, intentions were stellar, literally. And that's the pattern, isn't it? The smarter people are the better they become at rationalizing. The more elaborate the language, the harder it is to question the nonsense underneath it. You watch a man quoting ancient philosophy to justify a parking plan. Another uses quantum physics to defend his diet. Everyone sounds brilliant. No one makes sense. Marcus Aurelius warned about this trap. Don't waste time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. But you can't be anything good, wise, rational if you're too scared to say, I don't think this makes sense. You begin to see stupidity as a kind of fog, not dense, not choking, just ever-present. Soft enough that you barely notice it until you try to breathe clear air and realize how long you've gone without thinking freely. The people around you still aren't evil. Most of them are kind, educated, even generous. But they're lost. And not because they lack maps, but because they refuse to admit they're holding them upside down. You recall a Stoic idea that seems sharper now than ever. It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live in alignment with reason. And what is stupidity if not the daily refusal to engage your reason? You spot someone trying to hand out little flyers. You take one. It says, questioning isn't betrayal. You look up, no name, no organization, just a quiet face hopeful. You fold the paper and keep walking your own way. Because now you know stupidity doesn't need shouting, it needs company. And you've just decided to leave the party. You walk away from the crowd farther now. The noise fades like a song you no longer hum. With every step, something in your mind begins to unclench. For the first time in a long while, you don't feel like you're performing intelligence, you're actually using it. It's a strange kind of freedom, lonely, yes, but clean. You pass through a grove of trees and notice how still the world is when no one's trying to be right all the time. Just the wind, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, and your own breath. The silence feels sacred. Then you remember history has walked this path before. The Roman Empire didn't collapse in one night of flames. It unraveled slowly from the inside out. Roads were still swept, temples still stood, taxes still collected. But decisions grew worse. Leaders got weirder. Common sense became a rare currency. Historians still argue whether it was decadence, inflation, overextension, or just sheer compounding foolishness. At some point, it no longer mattered which theory was correct. The result was the same. Something massive and beautiful fell apart not because it was conquered, but because it stopped thinking. A quirky footnote in that timeline, Emperor Elagabalus once tried to replace Jupiter with a sun god named Sol Invictus by force-feeding the new religion to Rome, complete with live leopard sacrifices at dinner parties. People called him eccentric until he was assassinated and dumped in the Tiber. But he believed in it. That's what makes it scary. You remember Seneca's line, "A ship should not sail with every wind," yet most people, you realize, aren't even aware they've hoisted a sail. They think they're steering when they're really just drifting with whoever shouts the loudest. And here's the hard truth you finally let sink in. Stupidity doesn't destroy things by force. It does so through permission. 1,000 silent approvals, 1,000 quiet nods. That's what leads to bad policies, pointless wars, broken institutions, and baffling trends like putting whipped coffee on everything. You stop near a small stream, its waters flow with calm purpose. You crouch, touch the surface, and think even this tiny current has more clarity than the direction you were walking in earlier. You begin to understand why Stoicism never promised comfort. It promised lucidity, and that's rarer, and harder, and far more important. Because clarity means you see the cost of every compromise. Every moment you laughed at a dumb idea to fit in. Every time you said, "Well, who am I to say?" Every time you stayed quiet. You trace back a few of your own moments. They come easily now. The time you let someone take credit for your idea. The time you nodded along at a party where no one made sense. The time you said, "Sure, why not?" when everything in you screamed, "No." You weren't evil, but you weren't awake either. Epictetus would have reminded you freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want. It's the power to do what is right. And what's right doesn't shout. It doesn't trend. It doesn't come with a link in bio or a viral sound clip. It just waits patiently for you to notice it. You stand up again. Your feet feel lighter. Somewhere in the distance, you still hear the crowd, duller now, distant. You wonder if they'll notice the cliff when they reach it or if they'll build a stage on it and keep dancing. Either way, you won't be there. You're not above them. You're not better. You're just awake. And finally, truly, you're walking by choice. The road ahead of you narrows and twists, but that's fine. You no longer expect it to be straight. You don't need clarity in the terrain, only in the mind. You pause beneath an old olive tree. Its bark is gnarled, its branches wide. You remember reading that the Stoics often walked beneath these same trees, speaking of logic and virtue and measured tones, while the rest of the world burned with drama. Something about that thought makes you smile. You sit beneath the tree's shade, and in that moment of stillness, Epictetus returns. Not as a philosopher on a pedestal, but like a quiet old friend whispering, "The unexamined opinion is a borrowed chain." You reach into your pocket and feel the folded flyer. Questioning isn't betrayal. You unfold it again. Still just those words. No branding, no contact info. Maybe that's the point. You begin to understand how wisdom works. It doesn't broadcast itself. It doesn't arrive wrapped in credentials or charisma. It slips in sideways softly. It requires invitation. And stupidity, it requires only that you leave the door unlocked. You remember the sweet old lady you met once, a kind neighbor, who suggested planting eucalyptus trees to freshen the air? Everyone loved the idea. You all planted them? 2 years later, your local bee population crashed. No one blamed her. Why would they? She meant well. But a forest of bad decisions starts with a single sapling, and no one planting it ever thinks they're growing a problem. That's why Stoicism demands constant inspection. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is mistaken, instruct them kindly. If you are mistaken, be glad to be corrected." That's a revolutionary sentence in an age where being wrong feels like failure instead of growth. You watch as a beetle climbs the edge of your shoe. It struggles over the seam, reorients itself, then carries on. No drama, no shame, just recalibration. You begin to wonder what life would look like if we all accepted being wrong that gracefully. Historians still debate whether the Salem witch trials were driven more by superstition politics or mass hysteria. But what's clear is that it wasn't the wicked who lit the fires. It was the frightened, the unsure, the ones who'd heard a rumor then let it bloom unchecked. You wonder how many of those townsfolk woke up years later and whispered to themselves, "I didn't mean for that to happen." Meaning well doesn't cancel outcome. A quirky bit of forgotten science history crosses your mind in the 1800s. A British expert insisted that railway travel over 30 miles per hour would liquefy human organs. He published several pamphlets, he gave lectures. No one questioned him until they built a faster train and no one melted. You wonder how long people lived in fear of a myth because one man sounded sure of himself. You lean back against the tree and stare upward through its branches. Light filters through in uneven patches. The pattern reminds you of how truth arrives not all at once, but in slivers shaped by perspective. That's why Stoicism is a lifelong discipline, not a single revelation. You don't just wake up, you stay awake. You stay alert. You ask why even when the answer is inconvenient, especially when the answer is inconvenient. You hear faint footsteps behind you, someone else leaving the crowd. They don't speak. They sit near you beneath the same tree, and you're not alone. Wisdom doesn't shout across valleys. It whispers under olive trees. The person beside you doesn't say much. You share the shade without ceremony, without introductions. Just two humans sitting still in a world that rarely allows it. And somehow that's enough. After a while, they speak not to debate, not to convince, but like someone remembering aloud. I used to believe everything loud was true, they say quietly. The more confident someone sounded, the more I trusted them, until I realized a lot of the time they were just the best at pretending. You nod slowly, because that right there is the seed of the entire problem, certainty without substance. You've seen it in meetings and group chats, on news panels and dinner tables. People mistaking volume for value, swagger for sense, and worse, mistaking agreement for accuracy. You've done it too. The Stoics would nod here with soft compassion, not judgment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If anyone can show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. For I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed." It sounds noble until you try it. Then it feels more like surgery, because changing your mind isn't just admitting you were wrong, it's stepping out of the crowd and into the cold air of independence. You think of that moment maybe years ago when someone challenged you, and instead of listening, you defended. Not because you had better evidence, but because you didn't want to feel stupid. The irony, you clung to stupidity to avoid feeling stupid. Historians still debate the true spark behind the Great Fire of London in 1666. Some blamed foreign spies, others blamed divine wrath. But records show that the fire spread wildly because city planners, knowing the risk, still built wooden houses too close together. Not evil, just lazy thinking. And thousands paid the price. You glance back toward the distant crowd. You can still hear them. A little quieter now. Maybe fewer people marching. Maybe more pausing. Maybe. Your companion beside you begins sketching something in the dirt, a little spiral. Then they cross it with a single line. What's that, you ask? A map, they say with a slight smile, of how not to think. You get it. You've been inside that spiral before, looping thoughts reinforced by other looping thoughts, all circling back to assumptions never questioned. A quirky science anecdote pops into mind in the 1970s. A researcher claimed that water could remember substances once dissolved in it. The idea was nonsense. But it sounded poetic. It spawned a minor cult and decades of pseudoscience. All because people wanted it to be true. Belief, when stubborn, is stronger than evidence. You stare down at the spiral, then at your hands. You used to think walking with the crowd was a kind of safety. Now you see it was just a way to postpone the fear of thinking for yourself. The Stoics would say that reason is your natural state, that you don't have to invent it, you just have to return to it. Epictetus put it bluntly, you were not made for endless opinion. You were made to live by principle. You feel something in your chest lighten, not pride, not even relief. Just alignment, as if something long tilted inside you finally sits upright. Your companion stands. They don't invite you to follow, they don't give a speech, they just walk quietly in a new direction, one that doesn't lead back to the noise. And you think, maybe I'll go that way too. Not because someone told you to, but because you asked yourself why. And finally you answered. You rise slowly, brushing the dust from your hands. The spiral still sits in the dirt behind you, half faded by a breeze that seems to understand what needs to be erased. You begin to walk deliberately now, not hurried, not anxious. The path ahead isn't marked, but it's not uncertain. Because your steps no longer need validation from the crowd, they just need direction from within. And that, you realize, is something most people never learn to trust. You pass a stone bench and notice someone already sitting there. An elderly woman wrapped in a shawl, hands folded in her lap. Her face is warm, peaceful. She looks like someone who bakes pies and forgets your name, but never your birthday. She waves you over and you sit. You make small talk, her garden, her cat, the weather. Then she says without any warning, I once ruined 4 lives because I didn't want to look rude. You blink. She smiles faintly. It was years ago. A young man from our church had an idea, some business venture. I forget the details. It was risky, foolish really, but he was sweet. So polite, so passionate. Everyone said yes, so I did too. She looks down at her hands. It failed. Of course, 2 families lost their savings, 1 woman lost her home, and all I did was nod. You try to say something, anything, but she holds up a finger gently. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, that's the part that keeps me up at night. You feel the words settle like dust, because you know she's not alone. How many decisions in your life, big or small, have been shaped not by malice, but by your desire not to disappoint? Not to stand out, not to say, wait, are we sure about this? The Stoics had a name for this kind of fear, eulabia. Not fear of death or pain, but fear of social disapproval. Fear of embarrassment. Epictetus called it a counterfeit emotion, something that feels like virtue but ends in vice. And that's the subtle tragedy of stupidity. It doesn't require cruelty. It only requires comfort. The woman beside you sighs. They all forgave me, you know. Told me it wasn't my fault, that I meant well. She looks at you now, eyes sharp, calm. But good intentions don't pay hospital bills. And they don't rebuild trust. Historians still argue whether the Chernobyl disaster was caused by design flaws or human error. But the root, many say, was silence. Engineers afraid to challenge orders. Managers afraid to delay results. No villains, just frightened minds in a rigid system. And the cost measured in centuries. You sit quietly watching the breeze move her shawl like water. A quirky footnote returns to you. In medieval France, a village once drowned a rooster. Yes, a rooster. They believed it laid an egg possessed by the devil. No one stood up to say that's not how biology works. So the rooster went on trial, was found guilty, and executed. All it took was agreement. You stand, thank her. She pats your hand like a grandmother forgiving a child. And you think, how many roosters have we drowned in the name of politeness? You walk on further now, not just away from the crowd, but away from the version of yourself that feared being different. You're not here to be loud or brave or famous. You're here to stop nodding when the compass spins. You're here to mean what you say. And when you don't know, you're here to say I'm not sure, because that too is wisdom. You keep walking. The path now is quiet, edged with wildflowers and thorny bushes, equal parts beauty and caution. The sun has dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretch like questions across the ground. But you aren't afraid of shadows anymore. You've spent too long mistaking loudness for clarity, crowds for truth, and good intentions for immunity. You've seen now how human stupidity, quiet, well-meaning, almost tender, can unravel worlds more thoroughly than any tyrant could ever dream. The Stoics never promised a world free from folly, only the strength to see it and not become it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. And you feel that urgency now, not morbid but clarifying, because every hour wasted in complicity is an hour stolen from clarity. You pass a small wooden sign, handwritten, nailed crookedly to a tree. It says, it's okay to outgrow the people you once agreed with. You let the words echo. Maybe they weren't meant for you, maybe they were. Either way, they stick. You pass a pair of hikers coming the other way. They look fresh from the parade, faces flushed with loyalty, backpacks full of slogans ready to hand out answers. You smile politely. They offer you a pamphlet. You accept it. Later you'll come post it. But for now you nod and let them pass. They're not evil, they're just early in the walk. You hope they find their own spiral in the dirt, their own tree, their own moment. You reach a clearing, the air is still. You sit down again cross-legged in the grass. And for the first time in a long while, you let yourself feel how heavy it is to carry unspoken doubts and how light it feels to finally set them down. You aren't trying to win arguments anymore, you're trying to live honestly. You remember one last thought from Epictetus: freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And what lies beyond your control? The crowd, the noise, the spirals, the slogans. But what is always within your grasp? Your pause, your choice, your ability to ask why. Now the breeze settles low, curling softly around your ankles like a cat that's found you after hours. The world around you hums low, restful, aware. Nothing rushes, nothing pulls. You watch as the last rays of sunlight slip behind the trees. Shadows lengthen, not as warnings, but as invitations to slow, to rest, to let the mind finally loosen from the loops it's been trapped in. Your breath is steadier now. No more marching, no more explaining. Just breath, just stillness. Just you and the quiet and the distant memory of a parade that no longer owns your feet. You feel the day release you, the tension uncurl. Your thoughts no longer demand resolution, they simply drift like leaves, letting go of branches without regret. You remember now what it means to rest not just your body but your beliefs. To not chase certainty but sit with curiosity. To accept that truth, if it matters, will wait for you. And in that peace, you begin to slip into sleep not because you've solved the world, but because you've stopped letting it confuse you. The world will still spin tomorrow, people will still chant, bad ideas will still wear good suits. But you'll wake with your compass set by thought, not fear, and that will always be enough.